I'm Sophia Mitchell, 31 years old, and I'm staring out my penthouse window this Thanksgiving morning, watching families below gather with their loved ones while my phone buzzes with notifications I don't want to see. 3 years running, my own family has excluded me from their holiday traditions, yet here I am scrolling through Rebecca's Instagram, seeing everyone at my sister's dinner table except me. The irony burns deeper than usual today because her husband Derek just started working as my senior developer last month. When my phone rings with an urgent work call, I have no idea this moment will change everything. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and if this resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about family drama and finding your worth. Trust me, you won't believe how this Thanksgiving betrayal unfolds, so stick around to see how the tables completely turn when family loyalty meets cold hard business reality. Growing up, the Mitchell family seemed picture perfect from the outside. My parents William and Margaret raised 3 kids in our modest suburban home in Ohio, where Sunday dinners were sacred and family always came first. But success has a funny way of revealing people's true colors, and mine started showing when I founded my AI software company at 26. What began as a small startup in my garage exploded into a multi-million-dollar business within 3 years, and suddenly everything changed. The pride in my mother's voice when she bragged to neighbors about her brilliant daughter slowly transformed into something bitter and resentful. Margaret started making passive-aggressive comments about how I was too busy with my fancy lifestyle to visit, even though I called every week and drove home monthly. My father, William, who'd worked construction his whole life, grew increasingly uncomfortable around me as my wealth grew. He'd make jokes about needing to watch his language around the CEO, but his eyes held disappointment, as if my success somehow diminished his worth as a provider. The man who taught me to work hard and dream big now acted like I'd betrayed our family values by achieving those dreams. But the worst transformation came from my sister Rebecca, 2 years younger and struggling to find her place in the world. She'd married Derek Thompson, a freelance programmer who bounced between contracts and spent more time playing video games than securing steady work. As my company grew and there shrank into financial instability, Rebecca's calls became less frequent and more strained. The first real exclusion happened last Christmas, when I received no invitation to our traditional Christmas Eve gathering. When I called to ask about plans, Rebecca claimed they'd forgotten to tell me about the change in venue and that it was too late to adjust the arrangements. I showed up anyway with gifts for everyone, only to find a small, intimate gathering that clearly hadn't included me from the start. The conversation stopped when I walked in, and despite my attempts to participate normally, I felt like an outsider in my own family. Derek spent the evening making snide comments about corporate sellouts and how real programmers don't abandon their principles for profit. Rebecca laughed at his jokes while avoiding eye contact with me, and our parents said nothing to defend me. Easter brought another oversight, and by summer, I wasn't even informed about family barbecues or birthday celebrations. My attempts to reconnect were met with cold shoulders and excuses. When I offered to pay for a family vacation, Margaret accused me of trying to buy forgiveness for something I didn't understand I'd done wrong. When I suggested dinner at nice restaurants, they complained about feeling uncomfortable in fancy places. When I invited them to my penthouse, they made excuses about being too busy or the drive being too far. Every gesture felt wrong. Every invitation seemed to highlight the growing chasm between my world and theirs. The breaking point came when Derek applied to work at my company 6 months ago. His resume landed on my desk through normal HR channels, and despite everything, I saw an opportunity to bridge our family gap. Derek was actually talented, his programming skills were solid, and working together might help rebuild our relationship. I personally approved his application and recommended him for a senior developer position with excellent benefits and a salary that would solve their financial problems. When he got the job, Rebecca called to thank me for giving Derek a chance, and for a brief moment, I thought we were healing. Derek seemed grateful during his first weeks, working hard and keeping professional boundaries. I hoped this might be the path back to being a real family again. But even with Derek earning a substantial salary at my company, the exclusions continued. Thanksgiving invitations went to everyone except me, birthday parties happened without my knowledge, and family group chats existed that deliberately excluded me from planning discussions. I realized that my money had created an invisible barrier that no amount of generosity or professional opportunities could break down. They resented my success while simultaneously benefiting from it through Derek's employment, creating a toxic dynamic where they needed me financially but rejected me emotionally. What I didn't know was how much deeper this betrayal actually ran, or that Derek's gratitude was nothing more than an elaborate cover for something much darker. The call came at 9 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, shattering the quiet of my empty penthouse with news that would change everything. My head of IT security, Marcus Chin, sounded panicked as he explained that someone had triggered multiple security alerts overnight by accessing our most sensitive client databases. Our system had detected unusual data transfers and unauthorized file downloads from a workstation that should have been locked down for the holiday weekend. Marcus was already at the office running diagnostics, but he needed me there immediately to authorize the full forensic investigation that this level of breach demanded. I threw on jeans and a sweater, my mind racing as I drove through empty Thanksgiving streets toward downtown. My company handled sensitive data for Fortune 500 clients, and any security breach could destroy everything I'd built over the past 5 years. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my family celebrated without me, I was rushing to protect the business that had supposedly driven us apart. When I arrived at our modern office building, I found Derek's car in the parking garage, which struck me as odd since he wasn't scheduled to work and had mentioned Rebecca's big Thanksgiving dinner plans. Marcus met me in the elevator with a grim expression and a tablet full of disturbing evidence. The security logs showed that someone with Derek's access credentials had entered the building at 11 p.m. the previous night and hadn't left until 6 a.m. Even more concerning, that person had spent 7 straight hours accessing client files, financial records, and proprietary algorithms that Derek had no legitimate reason to view. When I asked about emergency protocols for holiday work, Marcus shook his head grimly and explained that no emergency tickets had been filed, no supervisor approval existed, and Derek hadn't logged into our communication systems to report any issues requiring overnight attention. We found Derek in his cubicle, still there despite the early morning hour, surrounded by coffee cups and looking decidedly nervous when we approached. His explanation for working on Thanksgiving Eve made no sense, his story kept changing, and when I asked to see his work computer, his hands actually shook as he moved to close several applications. The security footage from his workstation showed him repeatedly inserting and removing a USB drive while copying files to external storage devices. When confronted with this evidence, Derek's face went completely white, and his defensive posture crumbled into obvious guilt. The forensics report revealed a systematic theft that had been ongoing for months, not a single incident of poor judgment. Derek had been methodically accessing and copying our most valuable intellectual property, including client contact lists, proprietary software code, financial projections, and merger discussions that could be worth millions to our competitors. The external drive contained gigabytes of stolen data organized into folders by potential value and marketability. Even worse, phone records showed Derek had been in regular contact with executives at our primary competitor, Innovate Solutions, and bank records revealed payments totaling over $200,000 deposited into accounts linked to Derek and Rebecca. When I confronted Derek with this evidence, his confession came tumbling out in a mixture of desperation and justification that shocked me to my core. He admitted to selling our client data and proprietary information to Innovate Solutions for months, explaining that the money was supposed to fund Rebecca's fertility treatments and help them buy a new house. But his justification cut deeper than the theft itself. Derek looked me straight in the eye and said that I should have been helping my family financially instead of hoarding wealth while they struggled. He claimed that my success created an obligation to support them, and since I hadn't offered help voluntarily, taking what they needed from my company was morally justified. The betrayal felt like a physical blow, realizing that while I'd been excluded from family gatherings and treated like an outsider, my own brother-in-law had been systematically stealing from me. Derek wasn't finished destroying me, though. His final threat revealed how calculated this entire situation had become. He warned me that firing him would only confirm what the family already believed about my character. He promised to tell everyone that I was vindictive and petty, using my wealth to hurt family members over minor workplace issues. Derek claimed that pressing charges would prove I valued money more than family relationships, and that my parents and Rebecca would never forgive me for destroying their lives over corporate paperwork. As I stared at this man I'd tried to help, who'd stolen from me while I was excluded from my own family celebrations, I realized this betrayal ran much deeper than one person's greed and desperation. My investigation into Derek's theft revealed a conspiracy that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family's character. Working with our forensics team and a private investigator, I discovered phone records showing dozens of calls between Derek, Rebecca, and my mother Margaret over the past 6 months. These weren't casual family check-ins, but strategic planning sessions that painted a picture of calculated betrayal. Email trails revealed that my family had been discussing Derek's access to my company and how to capitalize on the opportunity since the day I hired him. The fertility clinic bills that Derek claimed motivated his theft turned out to be completely fabricated, sophisticated forgeries that Rebecca had created to justify their sudden influx of cash. The real destination for the stolen money was Derek's gambling debts, accumulated through online poker and sports betting that had spiraled out of control. Rebecca not only knew about the gambling addiction, but had been enabling it by providing Derek with family financial information and encouraging him to take bigger risks with the assumption that my company's money would cover any losses. Bank records showed that instead of fertility treatments, their windfall had gone toward paying off credit cards, gambling websites, and luxury purchases that maintained their false image of financial stability. My mother Margaret's involvement proved to be the most painful discovery of all. Text message records showed her actively encouraging Derek's theft, telling him that I owed the family financial support and that taking money from my company was simply claiming what rightfully belonged to them. Margaret had convinced herself and others that my success was somehow built on family sacrifice and that I had moral obligations to share my wealth whether I chose to or not. Her messages revealed a twisted logic where she believed I was selfish for not automatically supporting them, making Derek's theft a form of justice rather than crime. Even my father William, who I'd thought was simply uncomfortable with my success, had known about the plan and remained silent despite his obvious moral reservations. The family group chat that excluded me contained months of discussions about my wealth, my company's value, and strategies for accessing what they saw as family money. Rebecca's messages were particularly brutal, calling me someone who thinks she can abandon family and keep all that money, and discussing how to manipulate me into providing financial support. Margaret's texts were even worse, encouraging Derek to take whatever he can because she'll never notice, and planning elaborate lies to cover their activities. The conspiracy extended beyond my immediate family to include Uncle Thomas and Aunt Janet, who had provided legal advice about avoiding prosecution and laundering the stolen money through legitimate-seeming transactions. Thomas, a paralegal with a small law firm, had researched corporate theft penalties and advised Derek on how to minimize evidence trails while maximizing the value of stolen information. Janet had helped Rebecca create the fake medical bills and coached her on emotional manipulation techniques to use if I ever became suspicious. Even my elderly grandmother Helen had been told lies about my supposed financial support of the family, making her complicit in maintaining their false narrative. Discovering the family group chat messages was like reading my own obituary written by people who were supposed to love me. They discussed my personality flaws, my relationship failures, and my supposed arrogance with the casual cruelty of strangers gossiping about someone they disliked. Rebecca shared details about my dating life that I'd confided to her in private, using them to paint me as a lonely workaholic who deserved isolation. Margaret psychoanalyzed my motivations and declared that my success had made me forget where she came from and too good for her own family. The conversations revealed that they'd been building a narrative about my character that justified their planned theft and continued exclusion from family events. The timeline showed that this conspiracy had begun almost immediately after Derek started working for my company, meaning that their gratitude and Rebecca's phone call thanking me had been complete fabrications. Every family interaction since Derek's hiring had been carefully orchestrated to keep me unsuspicious, while they systematically stole from my business and destroyed my reputation behind my back. They'd been using my success to maintain appearances in their social circles, telling neighbors and friends that I financially supported the entire family through our family business, while simultaneously excluding me from every meaningful family gathering and relationship. As I sat in my office reading through months of evidence showing how my own family had planned and executed this betrayal, I felt completely alone in the world for the first time in my life. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had reduced me to a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be cherished. They'd stolen my money, destroyed my trust, and spent months discussing my flaws and failures with the kind of vicious detail usually reserved for enemies. But as the shock wore off and the full scope of their conspiracy became clear, something inside me shifted from heartbreak to determination, and I began planning a response that would show them exactly what kind of person I really was when pushed to my limits. Instead of confronting my family immediately or calling the police in emotional rage, I made a calculated decision that would prove more devastating than any knee-jerk reaction. Years of building a successful business had taught me the value of patience and strategic thinking, and this situation demanded both. I consulted with my corporate attorney about building an airtight case that would survive any legal challenges while protecting my company's reputation and client relationships. Every piece of evidence needed to be documented perfectly, every step had to be legally sound, and every potential defense strategy had to be anticipated and countered before we moved forward. My lawyer advised allowing Derek to continue his theft under careful surveillance, while we gathered additional evidence and traced the full extent of the conspiracy. This meant watching him steal from me daily while pretending everything was normal, but it also meant building a case so strong that no amount of family manipulation or emotional appeals could undermine it. We installed additional monitoring software on Derek's workstation, recorded all his communications, and tracked every file he accessed or copied. I even began feeding him false information about upcoming deals and client plans to test whether my family was sharing intelligence with competitors beyond what Derek could access directly. The test confirmed my worst fears about their loyalty and coordination. Within hours of Derek accessing the decoy files I'd planted about a fake merger deal, Rebecca was posting cryptic social media messages about big changes coming, and Margaret was telling neighbors about exciting developments in the family business. Phone records showed immediate calls between all the conspirators after Derek shared the false information, proving they were actively coordinating their exploitation of my company and planning their responses to potential windfalls from his theft. During this surveillance period, I discovered that Rebecca had been using my company's name and her relationship to me to apply for business loans and credit lines without my knowledge or permission. She'd forged documents suggesting she was a partner in my business and had convinced multiple lenders to approve significant credit based on my company's financial strength and her claimed ownership stake. Margaret had been telling her entire social circle that I financially supported the whole family through our shared business interests, using this false narrative to justify expensive purchases and lifestyle choices that their real income couldn't support. The social media investigation revealed the true extent of how they'd been using my success to maintain false appearances in their community. Family photos were carefully staged to suggest wealth and success, with expensive items borrowed or rented for the pictures. Rebecca's Instagram featured designer clothes and luxury vacations that were supposedly funded by her partnership in my family company, while Margaret's Facebook posts constantly referenced her daughter's generosity and the family's shared success in the tech industry. They'd created an elaborate fiction where my individual achievement had become their collective prosperity, even while excluding me from every family gathering and relationship. Derek's theft grew bolder as he became more confident that he wouldn't be caught or punished. He began accessing even more sensitive files, stealing larger amounts of data, and demanding additional information from me under the guise of legitimate work projects. His gambling escalated alongside his theft, with larger bets and riskier investments as he convinced himself that my company's money was an endless resource for covering his losses. Rebecca encouraged this escalation, believing that Derek's insider access to my business meant they could predict and profit from my company's success indefinitely. Meanwhile, I quietly protected my company by ensuring that Derek only had access to worthless decoy information while the real sensitive data was moved to secure systems he couldn't penetrate. Every file he stole was carefully chosen to seem valuable while actually containing outdated information, false data, or harmless materials that couldn't damage my business even if shared with competitors. This strategy allowed me to build my legal case while minimizing actual harm to my clients and company operations. The emotional toll of maintaining this charade was enormous, requiring me to smile and interact normally with Derek at work while knowing he was stealing from me daily and coordinating with my family to exclude and exploit me. I had to pretend gratitude for Rebecca's rare phone calls while knowing she was using those conversations to gather intelligence for their conspiracy. Every family interaction became a performance where I played the naive sister and daughter while secretly documenting their lies and manipulation for future legal action. My transformation during this period felt profound and irreversible, as if watching my family's betrayal in real time was burning away the last remnants of the trusting person I'd once been. The hurt was evolving into something colder and more focused, a determination to ensure that their calculated cruelty would have consequences they hadn't anticipated. I was learning to think like the successful businesswoman they resented rather than the loving family member they'd rejected. And that shift in perspective was preparing me for actions I never thought I'd be capable of taking against people I'd once loved unconditionally. The call came exactly 1 week before Thanksgiving, Rebecca's voice unusually warm and sweet as she delivered the words I'd been waiting years to hear. She claimed the family missed me terribly and that everyone agreed it was time to end whatever misunderstanding had kept us apart. Derek, she explained, felt terrible about the distance between our families and wanted to use the holiday as an opportunity to rebuild our relationships. The invitation to join their traditional Thanksgiving dinner felt like a gift, but my recent discoveries had taught me to question every gesture from my family, no matter how sincere it appeared. Rebecca's timing wasn't coincidental, and neither was the sudden change in her attitude toward me. My private investigation had revealed the full scope of their financial crisis, painting a picture of desperation that explained their new interest in reconciliation. Margaret was facing foreclosure on the family home after falling behind on mortgage payments and accumulating massive credit card debt, trying to maintain her false lifestyle. Rebecca's own credit cards were maxed out from covering Derek's gambling losses and maintaining their appearance of prosperity. Derek owed significant money to online gambling sites and had exhausted his credit options through legitimate channels. The family needed my money desperately but were too proud and had burned too many bridges to ask for help directly. Their strategy was clearly to use Thanksgiving dinner as an opportunity to manipulate me emotionally while positioning Derek's continued employment as essential to their survival. They hoped that family togetherness and holiday sentiment would soften me enough to offer financial assistance or at least ignore Derek's performance issues at work. What they didn't realize was that I knew about Derek's theft and their conspiracy, making their invitation feel more like walking into a trap than receiving a genuine reconciliation offer. I accepted the invitation with apparent gratitude and relief, playing the role of the lonely sister who desperately wanted to belong to her family again. My performance over the phone was Oscar-worthy as I thanked Rebecca repeatedly for reaching out and expressed how much I'd missed everyone. I promised to bring expensive wine and asked what I could contribute to the dinner, playing into their expectations about my wealth while secretly planning how to use their greed against them. Rebecca's suggestions about gift contributions were telling, focusing on expensive items that could be returned for cash rather than thoughtful personal gestures. Behind the scenes, I was preparing evidence folders for each family member that documented their specific roles in the conspiracy against me. Derek's folder contained detailed records of his theft, including security footage, financial records, and communications with competitors. Rebecca's file showed her loan fraud, her enabling of Derek's gambling, and her coordination in planning the theft. Margaret's evidence included her text messages encouraging Derek's crimes and her lies to neighbors about financial support. Even Uncle Thomas and Aunt Janet had folders documenting their legal advice about avoiding prosecution and their assistance in money laundering schemes. I arranged for my attorney to be available by phone during the dinner and had police contacts ready to respond if needed, though I hoped the threat of legal action would be enough to ensure cooperation. The evidence was overwhelming, and the crimes were serious enough to result in federal charges if prosecuted fully. Derek's theft of proprietary information crossed state lines when he shared it with competitors, making it a federal case with potential prison sentences that would destroy their lives completely. Derek's behavior at work during this final week revealed his growing suspicion that something had changed in our relationship dynamic. My new friendliness seemed to make him nervous rather than grateful, and he began asking careful questions about company security and my plans for his continued employment. Rebecca pumped Derek for information about my mood and any comments I'd made about family relationships, trying to gauge whether their reconciliation strategy was working effectively. Margaret started dropping heavy hints about family financial struggles during her phone calls to me, testing whether I'd offer assistance voluntarily. My father, William, remained largely silent about the planning, but seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the family's direction, suggesting that his moral reservations were growing stronger as the stakes increased. His few comments to me were awkward attempts to rebuild our relationship without acknowledging the conspiracy, making it clear that he knew about their plans but hoped to avoid being held responsible for the consequences. His position as a reluctant participant rather than an active conspirator would influence how I dealt with him when the truth finally came out. The emotional preparation for destroying my family forever was perhaps the most difficult aspect of my planning process. I knew that exposing their conspiracy would end any possibility of genuine reconciliation and would likely result in permanent estrangement from everyone I'd grown up loving. But their calculated betrayal had already killed the family I remembered, replacing it with a group of conspirators who saw me as a resource rather than a person. The family dinner would simply make official what had already happened in reality, ending the pretense that we could ever be genuine family again after everything they'd done. I arrived at Rebecca's house carrying expensive wine, gourmet appetizers, and carefully wrapped gifts for everyone, playing the role of the grateful sister who was finally being welcomed back into the family fold. The house looked perfect from the outside, with autumn decorations and warm lights that created the image of domestic bliss, but I now knew that this appearance was maintained through credit card debt and stolen money from my company. Rebecca greeted me with an enthusiastic hug that felt performative rather than genuine, her smile too bright and her gratitude too effusive for someone who'd excluded me for years without explanation. The family's fake warmth throughout the evening was almost comical in its obviousness, once I knew the truth about their motivations and conspiracy. Margaret fussed over me constantly, asking about my work and expressing pride in my success, with the kind of motherly attention I'd craved for years, but now recognized as manipulation designed to soften me for financial requests. William made awkward jokes about being proud of his successful daughter while avoiding eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with his role in their plan, but unwilling to break ranks with the family consensus. Derek's nervous energy was palpable throughout dinner as he tried to balance gratitude for his job with subtle hints about how important his continued employment was for their family's future. His comments about loving his work at my company and feeling grateful for the opportunity were clearly designed to remind me that firing him would hurt Rebecca and their children rather than just punishing his individual crimes. Rebecca reinforced these messages by talking constantly about Derek's dedication to his job and how much stability his position had brought to their marriage and family planning. Margaret's pointed comments about successful people's obligations to family became increasingly direct as the evening progressed, testing whether I'd respond with offers of financial assistance. She talked about how family wealth should be shared during difficult times and how blood relationships created responsibilities that transcended individual success or failure. Her tone remained loving and motherly, but her message was clearly designed to establish moral pressure for me to offer monetary help for their various crises and financial needs. Rebecca's hints about Derek's job being crucial for their future plans became more specific as she discussed their hopes for buying a bigger house and starting a family soon. She mentioned how Derek's salary had changed their entire life trajectory and how grateful they were that I'd given him such an important opportunity with my company. Her implication was clear that any threat to Derek's employment would destroy their dreams and family stability, making me responsible for their happiness and future success. After dinner, the family gathered in the living room for what Rebecca called their traditional gratitude sharing, a ceremony I didn't remember from childhood, but which seemed designed to manipulate my emotions further. Each family member took turns sharing what they were most grateful for this year, and every single person mentioned my success, my generosity, or Derek's employment at my company. The performance was so coordinated that it felt like a rehearsed sales presentation rather than genuine expressions of thankfulness. When my turn came to share what I was grateful for, I looked around the room at these people I'd once loved unconditionally and said simply, "I'm grateful for family loyalty and honesty." The irony was lost on them initially, but their expressions began to change as I reached into my purse and pulled out the printed evidence of their theft, lies, and conspiracy that I'd been carrying all evening. Derek's face went completely white as I placed my laptop on the coffee table and began playing the security footage of him copying files and stealing proprietary information from my company. The bank records showing stolen money, fabricated medical bills, and forged loan documents were spread across the coffee table like an accusatory feast, each piece of evidence carefully labeled and organized for maximum impact. The family group chat messages were read aloud in my steady voice, revealing their cruel discussions about my personality, their justifications for stealing from me, and their detailed plans for continued exploitation of my success and resources. Margaret's text messages encouraging Derek's theft were particularly devastating when read in her own words to her own face. Derek's attempts to deny the evidence crumbled quickly when confronted with video footage, recorded phone calls, and documented financial transactions that proved his guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. His explanation that the family deserved support and that taking money from my company was morally justified fell apart when faced with the scope of his theft and the coordination with my family members. Rebecca's breakdown came when the fake fertility clinic bills were exposed, revealing that Derek's gambling addiction and her enabling behavior were the real motivations behind their crimes. Margaret's initial attempts to deny her involvement transformed into angry justification as she realized that the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Her texts were in her own words, her phone calls were recorded, and her coordination with Derek was documented thoroughly. Her final defense was emotional manipulation, claiming that I'd become heartless with my wealth and had forgotten my obligations to the people who'd raised and supported me. William's weak apology acknowledged his awareness of the plan while trying to minimize his participation, claiming that he'd thought the family deserved financial help and that I could afford to lose the stolen money. Uncle Thomas and Aunt Janet's shocked silence revealed their awareness that their legal advice about avoiding prosecution had been documented and that they could face criminal charges for their assistance in the conspiracy. The evidence of their involvement was clear enough to result in disbarment for Thomas and serious legal consequences for both of them. Their attempts to claim ignorance about the full scope of Derek's theft rang hollow when confronted with recorded conversations about money laundering and strategies for avoiding detection. The immediate aftermath of my revelation transformed Thanksgiving dinner into a battlefield where years of resentment and betrayal exploded into open warfare between people who'd once shared genuine love and respect. Derek's termination from my company was effective immediately, and I announced that criminal charges would be filed within 24 hours for corporate theft, fraud, and conspiracy. The federal nature of his crimes, involving interstate commerce and wire fraud, meant that prison sentences were not just possible but likely, especially given the documented scope and duration of his theft. Rebecca's reaction was pure rage directed entirely at me rather than at Derek for his crimes or herself for enabling them. She screamed that I'd ruined Thanksgiving and destroyed the family through my vindictive response to what she characterized as a minor workplace issue. Her inability to acknowledge the seriousness of Derek's theft or her own participation in the conspiracy revealed how completely she'd justified their actions in her mind. She accused me of being heartless and cruel, using my wealth as a weapon against family members who'd only wanted their fair share of success. Margaret's tears quickly transformed into bitter anger as she realized that her comfortable narrative about my obligations to family could not survive the evidence of coordinated betrayal and theft. Her decades of passive-aggressive manipulation were replaced by direct accusations that money had corrupted my values and turned me against the people who'd loved me first. She claimed that my success had made me forget my roots and become the kind of person who would destroy family relationships over financial disagreements and corporate policies. William's disappointment cut deeper than the other's anger because it revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of what had happened and his continued belief that family loyalty should supersede legal and moral considerations. His comment that this isn't how family handles problems showed his expectation that I should have covered up Derek's crimes to preserve family harmony rather than seeking justice through legal channels. His inability to grasp that their conspiracy had already destroyed our family relationships made meaningful reconciliation impossible. My calm response to their emotional outbursts focused on the systematic nature of their betrayal and the emotional damage they'd caused through years of exclusion, manipulation, and exploitation. I explained in detail how much their rejection had hurt me and how their conspiracy had destroyed my ability to trust any gesture of family affection or reconciliation. I revealed that I would have provided financial assistance gladly if they'd approached me honestly instead of choosing theft and deception as their preferred strategies. Derek's desperate attempts to bargain for mercy included offers to return the stolen money, resign quietly from his position, and submit to whatever conditions I deemed appropriate for avoiding prosecution. His proposals revealed his continued failure to understand that the betrayal of trust was irreparable regardless of financial restitution or employment consequences. I told him directly that trust was like glass, and once shattered by such calculated deception, it could never be made whole again through apologies or promises. Extended family members' reactions split along predictable lines based on their own involvement in the conspiracy and their personal relationships with the primary actors. Cousin Sarah and a few others expressed support for my position and admitted they'd suspected something was wrong with the family's financial situation and Derek's access to my company. Others, particularly those who'd benefited from Margaret's false narrative about my financial support, took the family's side and accused me of overreacting to minor issues. The neighborhood and social circle impacts were immediate and devastating for my family's carefully constructed false image. Their claims about my financial support and their partnership in my success were exposed as lies, destroying their credibility and social standing in their community. Rebecca's social media posts about designer lifestyles funded by family business success became embarrassing evidence of fraud rather than proud achievements to celebrate and share. Derek's marriage began showing strain immediately as the full scope of his gambling addiction and the lies he'd told Rebecca became clear through the investigation evidence. The money from his theft had gone to online gambling sites and sports betting rather than family expenses or investments, meaning that Rebecca had been living on borrowed time financially while believing their situation was improving. Her realization that Derek had been lying to her as extensively as he'd been stealing from me shattered her ability to defend his actions or their marriage. Margaret's social circle learned about her manipulation attempts and false claims through community gossip and social media discussions, destroying decades of carefully built relationships and reputation in their neighborhood. Her position as a respected community member and devoted mother was replaced by notoriety as someone who'd encouraged criminal behavior and exploited family relationships for financial gain. The foreclosure proceedings on her house continued because the stolen money had already been spent or gambled away rather than used to solve their legitimate financial problems. William's retirement funds became part of the investigation as evidence revealed his knowledge of Derek's schemes and his silent complicity in the conspiracy, potentially exposing him to financial penalties and legal consequences despite his reluctant participation. His position as an unwilling accomplice rather than an active conspirator provided some legal protection, but his reputation and family relationships were damaged beyond repair by his failure to protect me from their planned exploitation. My own struggle with guilt continued despite being the victim rather than the perpetrator of these crimes, as I grappled with the reality that seeking justice would result in permanent estrangement from everyone I'd grown up loving. The family I remembered from childhood was gone forever, replaced by bitter strangers who saw me as an enemy to be defeated rather than a sister and daughter to be cherished. But their calculated betrayal had made that loss inevitable regardless of how I chose to respond to their crimes. The weeks following Thanksgiving brought surprising revelations about family members I'd written off and devastating new betrayals from people I'd thought might still care about me as a person rather than a resource. Cousin Sarah reached out privately to admit she'd suspected Derek's financial situation didn't match his lifestyle and had wondered about the family's sudden claims of business partnership with my company. Her courage in speaking up despite family pressure revealed that not everyone had been complicit in the conspiracy and that some relationships might be salvageable despite the widespread betrayal. Grandmother Helen, who I'd assumed was simply misinformed about family financial arrangements, surprised me by revealing that she'd never believed Margaret's stories about my supposed support payments and had been worried about my exclusion from family gatherings. Her offer to testify about the lies she'd been told provided crucial evidence for the prosecution case, while showing that genuine family love still existed despite the conspiracy's reach. Her support felt like discovering an oasis in a desert of betrayal and manipulation. The investigation into Derek's criminal history revealed that my family weren't his first victims, as employment background checks uncovered a pattern of theft from previous employers that had been covered up through private settlements and non-disclosure agreements. 2 other companies had experienced similar data theft and financial fraud during Derek's employment, but had chosen to handle the matters privately rather than pursuing criminal charges. This pattern of repeat offenses strengthened the prosecution case, while revealing that Rebecca had married someone with a documented history of workplace crimes. Rebecca's best friend Miranda provided the most devastating new information when she revealed that Rebecca had known about Derek's gambling addiction from the beginning of their relationship and had actively encouraged his theft from my company as a solution to their financial problems. Miranda's testimony showed that Rebecca wasn't simply an enabler or victim of Derek's deception, but had been a willing participant in planning and executing the theft conspiracy from its earliest stages. The new betrayal that hurt most came from Uncle Thomas, who attempted to negotiate a private deal to protect Derek from prosecution in exchange for returning part of the stolen money and agreeing to extended family financial support obligations. Thomas contacted my attorney directly with proposals that would have required me to provide ongoing payments to Derek's family while accepting responsibility for their financial stability. His assumption that I would pay to avoid family embarrassment revealed how completely he'd misunderstood my character and motivations. Aunt Janet's emotional manipulation attempts were even more calculated and cruel, as she organized a campaign involving extended family members to pressure me into showing mercy for Derek's crimes. Her strategy involved claiming that Derek's children would suffer if their father went to prison, making me responsible for innocent family members' welfare. Janet's coordination of this pressure campaign while simultaneously providing legal advice to help Derek avoid consequences showed the depth of her commitment to protecting the conspiracy rather than seeking justice. Derek's parents from his side of the family launched their own offensive against me, claiming that I'd entrapped their son and exploited his family relationship for corporate gain. Their narrative painted Derek as a victim of my manipulation who'd been encouraged to steal proprietary information as part of some elaborate business strategy. Their complete reversal of victim and perpetrator roles revealed how far people would go to avoid acknowledging their family members' criminal behavior and personal responsibility. Media attention became unavoidable when Derek's case became public due to my company's prominence in the tech industry and the unusual nature of family member corporate theft. Local business journals covered the story as a cautionary tale about hiring family members, while gossip websites focused on the personal betrayal aspects of the case. The family's attempts to control the narrative by painting me as a vindictive rich sister who'd destroyed loving relationships over minor workplace issues backfired when the evidence of systematic theft and conspiracy became public record. Derek's legal team adopted a strategy of arguing that I deliberately set him up by hiring him despite knowing about his financial problems and gambling addiction, claiming that his family relationship created an unfair power dynamic that I'd exploited. Their position required arguing that I'd somehow forced Derek to steal from my company while simultaneously excluding myself from family gatherings and relationships. The logical contradictions in this defense highlighted Derek's desperation and his lawyer's willingness to make any argument that might reduce his sentence. Rebecca's pregnancy announcement during this period felt like the ultimate manipulation attempt, as she revealed that she was expecting their first child and used this news to argue that Derek's imprisonment would destroy an innocent baby's future. Her timing was clearly calculated to generate maximum emotional pressure during plea bargain negotiations, and her social media posts about the pregnancy focused on Derek's role as a devoted father rather than acknowledging his crimes. The pregnancy was real this time, unlike the fabricated fertility treatments that had supposedly motivated the theft, but its announcement felt like another weapon in their ongoing campaign against justice. Margaret's stress-related health crisis provided another avenue for guilt manipulation, as family members blamed me for causing her blood pressure problems and anxiety attacks through my vindictive pursuit of Derek's prosecution. The argument that family loyalty should supersede legal consequences ignored the fact that Margaret had actively encouraged Derek's crimes and participated in the conspiracy against me. Her health problems were genuine, but using them to pressure me into dropping charges revealed the family's continued commitment to avoiding responsibility rather than accepting consequences. William's latest attempt at mediation failed completely because he still couldn't grasp the fundamental nature of the betrayal that had occurred or acknowledge that the family relationships he wanted to preserve had been destroyed by the conspiracy itself rather than by my response to it. His proposals for moving forward as a family required me to ignore criminal behavior, forgive systematic betrayal, and pretend that trust could be rebuilt without accountability or genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing. His continued inability to understand why legal consequences were necessary made meaningful reconciliation impossible even with the family member I'd thought might eventually come to understand my position. The business impact on my company's reputation became another factor in my decision-making process, as clients and partners needed reassurance that our security measures could prevent future internal theft and that family relationships wouldn't compromise professional obligations. My choice to pursue full prosecution despite family pressure actually strengthened confidence in my company's integrity and commitment to protecting client interests above personal considerations. My decision to pursue full prosecution despite overwhelming family pressure and emotional manipulation proved to be the most difficult, but ultimately most liberating choice of my entire life. The federal charges against Derek resulted in a plea bargain that included partial restitution, 5 years of probation, and 800 hours of community service, along with a felony conviction that would follow him for the rest of his career. The sentence was lighter than the maximum possible penalties, but severe enough to ensure that he faced real consequences for his systematic theft and betrayal of family trust. Rebecca's divorce proceedings began within weeks of Derek's conviction as the full scope of his gambling addiction and the lies he'd told throughout their marriage became undeniable through court testimony and evidence presentation. The pregnancy she'd announced as emotional leverage became another burden as she faced single motherhood while dealing with the financial wreckage Derek had created through his crimes and gambling losses. Her attempts to blame me for destroying their marriage fell apart when the evidence showed that Derek's behavior had made their relationship unsustainable regardless of legal consequences. Margaret's gradual understanding of how deeply she'd hurt me emerged slowly as the shock of criminal charges and family breakdown forced her to confront the reality of what she'd encouraged and participated in creating. Her initial anger and denial gave way to genuine remorse as she realized that her resentment about my success had driven her to support criminal behavior against her own daughter. Her health crisis had been real, triggered by the stress of facing consequences for actions she'd justified through years of twisted logic about family obligations and wealth distribution. William's separate attempts to rebuild our relationship were the most successful among my immediate family members because his participation in the conspiracy had been reluctant rather than enthusiastic, and his remorse seemed genuine rather than calculated for personal benefit. His acknowledgement that he'd failed to protect me from planned exploitation and his acceptance that legal consequences were necessary and appropriate created a foundation for potential reconciliation that didn't exist with the other conspirators. Our conversations were painful but honest as he grappled with his moral failures and their impact on our relationship. Setting new boundaries with any family members who wanted to rebuild relationships proved essential for my emotional healing and future peace of mind. Financial discussions became completely off-limits in any family interactions, with clear understanding that my wealth would never again be treated as a family resource or discussed as anything other than my individual achievement and responsibility. Trust would need to be earned through consistent behavior over years rather than rebuilt through apologies or promises that had proven worthless during the conspiracy. My therapy journey became crucial for processing the trauma of systematic family betrayal and rebuilding my sense of self-worth beyond financial success and achievement. Learning to distinguish between genuine relationships based on mutual respect and manipulative connections based on perceived benefit took time and professional guidance. The realization that I'd been seeking family approval and belonging from people who saw me as a resource rather than a person required fundamental changes in how I approached all relationships moving forward. Creating a chosen family through close friendships and mentor relationships provided the emotional support and genuine affection that my biological family had failed to offer during my most successful but isolating years. Business colleagues who'd become personal friends, mentors who'd guided my career development, and new relationships built on mutual respect and shared values filled the void left by family estrangement. These connections felt more authentic and supportive than family relationships that had been poisoned by resentment and financial expectations. My company emerged stronger from the security breach scandal as our response to internal theft demonstrated our commitment to protecting client interests above personal considerations and family relationships. Derek's replacement proved to be more talented and trustworthy, improving our development team's performance while eliminating the security risks his continued employment would have represented. The federal investigation's conclusion, without finding additional security vulnerabilities, restored client confidence and actually enhanced our reputation for integrity and professional standards. Rebecca's struggle as a single mother dealing with the financial and emotional aftermath of Derek's crimes became a cautionary tale about enabling destructive behavior and participating in family conspiracies driven by greed rather than love. Her attempts to rebuild her life required acknowledging her role in encouraging Derek's theft and facing the consequences of choices she'd made to prioritize money over moral principles. Her personal growth seemed genuine as she focused on providing stability for her child rather than continuing to blame others for problems she'd helped create. Derek's difficulty finding new employment after his conviction proved that actions have lasting consequences that extend beyond legal penalties into permanent career limitations and damaged reputation. His gambling addiction remained an ongoing struggle that required professional treatment and lifestyle changes he'd previously been unwilling to make. The theft conviction followed him through background checks and professional references, ensuring that his betrayal of trust would affect his future opportunities for years to come. My new Thanksgiving tradition of volunteering at homeless shelters provided perspective on genuine gratitude and meaningful family connections that weren't based on financial expectations or social obligations. Working with people who'd lost everything helped me appreciate the relationships and opportunities one did have while putting family drama into proper context. The holiday became about service and genuine thankfulness rather than performed gratitude and hidden agendas that had characterized my family's recent celebrations. Margaret's health recovery coincided with her growing understanding of how her resentment and manipulation had contributed to family destruction, leading to more genuine expressions of remorse than her initial anger and denial had suggested possible. Her social isolation resulting from community knowledge of her role in the conspiracy forced her to confront the difference between genuine family relationships and the toxic dynamic she'd helped create and maintain. The letter from Rebecca seeking genuine reconciliation without financial motives arrived 18 months after Derek's conviction, representing the first communication from her that didn't include requests for money or attempts to minimize the seriousness of what had happened. Her acknowledgement of her mistakes and acceptance of responsibility for enabling Derek's crimes provided a foundation for potential relationship rebuilding that hadn't existed during the immediate aftermath of the legal proceedings. My decision to give selected family members another chance came with clear boundaries and realistic expectations about what relationships could be rebuilt after such profound betrayal and what trust could be restored through consistent behavior over time. The process required patience and careful evaluation of whether changed behavior reflected genuine growth or simply new strategies for manipulation and exploitation. This Thanksgiving, as I sit with carefully rebuilt relationships based on honesty rather than financial expectations, I'm grateful for the painful lessons that taught me the difference between genuine love and calculated manipulation. The family that betrayed me taught me to value the people who see me as a person rather than a resource, and their conspiracy ultimately led me to stronger, more authentic relationships than I'd ever experienced before. What would you do if your own family betrayed your trust and stole from your business while excluding you from their lives? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about family drama, workplace betrayal, and finding your worth when the people closest to you let you down. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need to hear about setting boundaries with toxic family members. Thank you for watching, and remember that sometimes the family that truly loves you is the one you choose, not the one you're born into. Wishing you all genuine relationships built on respect rather than resentment this holiday season.